Now, I know, Mr. Lee, your organization was certainly has been vocal about some of the concerns that you have, and I would assume many builders are. There's a lot of smaller businesses amongst it could be family-run businesses and things like that. Could you maybe speak to your concerns or your thoughts around these changes? And whether you feel there's been proper consultation?
Yeah, I can certainly say that it's the number one issue raising its head in our home builders associations all across the country. Lots and lots of extreme concern over it because the nature of the business is it is small family-run business. A lot of the planning is around succession planning to children and transfer the business, and it appears that these changes would make that less attractive and sometimes not really feasible. Passive investment is a critical part of our industry because you need money on the side waiting for opportunities, particularly on the land development side and even on the on builders who are looking to, at the right price, at the right point, make an investment to buy land and lots to be able to build on. So yeah, an awful lot of concerns. Also a lot of concerns around being able to properly engage other members of the family in the family business, including all the sacrifices that are made by the whole family in getting a company up and running and keeping on going. And concern that they're being treated like they're employees, as if they are employees, and they're not, and they take on all kinds of risk, and it's part of what makes our economy run. So we are hearing it an awful lot, and therefore passing the news on.
Good, thank you.
Okay. And the final thing, the parity of esteem factor. I often joke around with my residents and the stakeholders I have that if I wasn't in this career, that I'd go and open my own business and become a stonemason or a bricklayer, because I could probably do quite well, because there aren't many out there, and the ones that are out there are retiring. And I think we've put a lot of money in. We put $85 million in for apprenticeships in our budget for on the labor side. Is there anything else that we can be doing? And I think it is maybe just changing a mindset on the parity esteem to encourage young folks to look at the trades as a career that you could actually do well financially.
Well, I think the words that you just expressed are exactly the type of messaging that we need to get out to all Canadians, young people in schools, parents in particular, who see university as the only route to success and trades as being a secondary option. Obviously, university is a good route to success, but so too are going into the skilled trades with the opportunity to be successful both in terms of income when you start out and then later on being successful potentially owning your own business. So I think communications at the federal level nationally and helping to support that messaging of this is a great option for your future, going to a community college or an institute and getting your skilled trade requirements taken care of so you can have a good career is a great opportunity, and we just need to communicate that.
Chair, do I have?
I'm going to start with Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, you've mentioned the need for governments to start getting serious about supply. So, federal government, GST, HST, depending on which province, could we not just incentivize by raising the amount you get, the rebate you get for housing?
Yeah, certainly. That when it was introduced many years ago, 1990s, early 90s, I do believe, was supposed to be introduced with the intent that it would get adjusted as prices went up, so too would that rebate. Of course, prices have clearly gone up, as we're talking about, and it has never changed. So it is something that we have advocated for a couple of decades, so yes.
And as more housing gets built, then that means also we'll get more GST revenue. So just that's one way the government could easily incentivize it. And again, that would make affordable housing, regardless if it's for social housing or just new housing stock at market price. That would be a good solution. Now, you've also mentioned about the impact that the proposed changes Mr. Morneau is contemplating and doing a consultation on. I've been speaking with people in my riding, and some developers have said, much as have you said, it takes 3 years sometimes for them to be able to bring a project to completion. 3 years of finding the property, getting the right designs, doing the public process, all that stuff, everything you've said about that slows everything up. and then what happens, you finally can build. But during that time, most of the money that was used as the down payment, so to speak, or for the financing is in a passive instrument to make sure you don't have churn by inflation. So they'll hold everything from money market funds to bonds to stocks, depending on whatever the selection process is. Now, I've been told by certain financial institutions that they will factor in tax liabilities and basically lend less, because if someone has, let's say, $1 million set aside for a new project, they will say, okay, if you have a tax liability, you have to factor that in. So I think there's a lot of hidden costs we have towards your industry specifically. In Kelowna, we do a lot of jobs come straight from construction. So when someone says that developers and construction companies, the way they hold cash, or the way they hold, I should say, passive assets, is going to discourage them to do that, does that worry you about overall construction then going down as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a critical part of how the organizations operate. And frankly, 3 years in some jurisdictions would be enviable to others, because in some places it takes longer than 3 years to get product online. It can be, almost as much as a decade in some of the more complicated and complex areas.
If more money is going towards paying taxes and that's less towards actually building buildings, that means less jobs. Do you think that there's a direct correlation there between someone's ability to save, to invest in a new development, as well as to be able to put people to work?
We do. We think there's a direct correlation to less jobs, less small businesses, less local businesses. So it's a big risk.
Okay, so and you're speaking specifically on these new proposals regarding passive investment. They will have a direct and real impact, not just on the owners of these companies, but their employees.
That's correct.
Okay, well, thank you.
If we could go to about 4 minutes.
Good, thanks, Mr. Chair. Maybe I'll just sort of return where I left off, I guess, at the last opportunity I had. Mr. Lee, you'd mentioned, some of the concerns that you had about the small business tax changes. But I wonder if you could maybe elaborate a bit for me in terms of, particularly for the smaller builders, the family-run builders, particularly where you've got several generations, or at least a couple of generations involved in the business. Maybe if you could just describe for me, the kinds of impacts that you would think they would see in terms of the jobs that might be lost, impacts that might be created on many of your members that are the smaller builders. Could you maybe just describe that a bit better for me?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's pretty typical for members of our organization, builders, renovators, to have family-operated businesses where different members of the family are participating, husband and wife. Very common for one spouse to be the on-site person and the other person to be doing the books, family members participating in different ways, trying to grow the business, and also looking for the future in terms of also protecting against downturns. As we know, housing is very cyclical. So the ability to put away investment for a rainy day when maybe times you're not going to be so lean, because you tend to be not eligible for unemployment insurance or anything like that in those instances, nor do most entrepreneurs, even if they set up their business, to magically be in that position. They don't want to. They're not that kind of people. They want to be self-sufficient. They're also looking at their retirement savings and different vehicles that they can use for that, because again, they're not on pensions and RSPs only go so far. So all of this is part of it. And then you're also typically building a family business that you want to get your children involved in, if they actually want to work with you, and then pass it on to them at one point. And so, any changes in taxation that are going to make that less desirable or even less feasible all run into this, which really begs the question, are we still going to be encouraging people to get into this type of entrepreneurial position, run the family business, or are they going to say, what, forget it, I'll just get a regular job, and then do we lose entrepreneurial spirit?
So would it be fair to say that you see these changes as potentially harming the ability for someone to pass their business down to the next generation of their family, and you're saying that these changes could potentially result in the attraction to actually start a business and employ people being something that we would be discouraging with those kinds of changes. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, from what we're seeing, this has the potential to do all of that. So, an ongoing consultation away to, if we want to look at the tax system, let's look at it in its entirety and make sure we address the right issues and don't have unintended consequences, if you will, for small businesses in Canada.
Thank you. Is there a little time, Mr. Chair?
No, that's it. Mr. Picard.
Thank you, Mr. Lee, since you are going to it. Previous experiences or previous slides brought me to meet let's say the darker side of the construction business. And since you mentioned the magical word of underground economy, do you think that what is not declared or declared incorrectly, if we have a change of culture, of behavior, what we can gain to clean the market would more than sufficiently compensate for all the needs you're looking for in terms of new money?
In terms of, the simple word is yes in many ways. What we've been looking at in terms of, for example, we've been big proponents of coming back with some form of home renovation tax credit around, targeted around key policy objectives. It could be energy efficiency, it could be aging in place as was put in, it could be to help first-time home buyers with their renovation jobs when they buy a fixer-upper because that's all they could afford and they want to fix it up. And we've done assessments based on the transition and change of culture, and when you do a tax credit program, you are forcing people to get a receipt so that they can get their tax credit. And just based on that, you would bring enough on board that you would, in terms of additional tax revenue, that if you got that cultural change, it would almost be a tax neutral program. And we do a lot of work with the Canada Revenue Agency on our Get It in Writing program to really combat the underground economy. The biggest thing that we see drives the underground economy is a sense from Canadians that they're being unfairly taxed. And in places where we've seen increases even in the HST, you automatically see increases in underground economy. So I think it's really important.
Sorry, I'm cutting you off on
Sure.
this one. I was saying, I do apologize, but have you said that people are tempted to go underground economy because they feel to be overly taxed?
Oh, absolutely. It's
so because they have usual tax that everybody pay, is paying a GST or whatever income tax and all that, all the rate we know, considering the income tax that is not that high in Canada, they still feel that it's way too much taxed and therefore they have to go on the underground economy?
Yeah, our experience with Canadians is when they feel they're being overly taxed, they look to do cash jobs. And that includes, and that's also one of the biggest problems we have in terms of the underground economy is people willing to pay cash. It's not just the people who are accepting cash, it's Canadians who are willing to pay cash because they think they're getting a deal, right? The typical deal is a contractor in lots of businesses, not just residential construction, will say, you don't have to, I'll give you 15% off or whatever the combined tax, federal, provincial is. Meanwhile, they're probably saving about 40% on all their taxes, and homeowners are happy to pay that because they think they pay too much tax.
Have you evaluated, although it's very difficult because it's underground, have you evaluated the potential size of the market if all this unknown revenue would be declared? What kind of revenue we can get from that? And have you established what is, from your perspective, a reasonable taxation level?
Sorry, I missed the last part of the question.
Have you evaluated the size of the underground market so for us we can know what kind of revenue we can have out of it? And at the same time, your appreciation of what is a reasonable taxation level or tax level for your market, because you are apparently overly taxed?
I'm just passing on what Canadians feel in terms of what drives the underground economy. But in terms of the size of the underground economy...
From the market, from the construction business.
Just hold on, Mr. Lee. Quickly answer one short question from Mr. Dussault, and then we'll have to pack it in. Mr. Lee.
All right, so the underground economy is estimated in Canada at around 20 billion at least. The opportunity to bring it above board is very much a function of how we change cultural norms, because that's really what it comes down to.
20 billion. Mr. Dussault.
Juste rapide parce que j'étais.
I'll be quick. I was surprised that was my next question for you, Mr. Lee. I was surprised that we hadn't yet talked about an eco-energy program that in provinces such as Quebec works very well, and it requires that contractors declare all of their activity. And members of the various professional builders associations require this as well, and consumers ask for receipts. And they must prove to the government that they've made whatever purchase they're claiming. You didn't necessarily mention this in your notes, but are you asking that this eco-energy program come back?
Retrofit program, and it's why we recommend the return of a renovation tax credit that would be aimed at energy efficiency, for example, would be based in similar ways on the EnerGuide rating system, which is very good. Getting labels on houses really helps people appreciate the value of energy efficiency. Our recommendation, rather than a grant program and instead doing it as a tax credit program, is simply because of the enforceability and because Canadians are much less likely to want to defraud Revenue Canada as opposed to getting a grant, and so the Revenue Canada approach has a lot of incentives in that sense, and easier to enforce, because if you defraud, you've done tax fraud, which is way different than, well, I got a grant and I might not have given you the entire truth. But in terms of its success in the underground economy and combating it, it's been excellent. So we'd be very supportive of a return of that type of thing.
Very last question. We're 5 minutes late start and very short. Mr. Polyev.
Mr. Lee, you mentioned that higher taxes generally lead to a bigger black market in home renos and construction. Do you believe that these latest proposed tax increases on small business owners may have that effect as well?
Absolutely, unfortunately, and we hear about it. We have a major campaign in our association to help our members fight against their competitors who deal in the black market, but there's no question, and we see it all the time. As I said, when taxes go up in the different provinces, there's an immediate reaction of the underground economy going up.
Okay, just on the underground economy, if members want to test it out, that it's there, I'd suggest all you need to do, I've had it happen to me, all you need to do is put out an offer that you want to fix your roof or paint your house and go to 3 contactors, and I would imagine you'll be, or individuals, you'll be made an offer. And it is something that we do need to address. Just to
at all, and I think there's going to be a need for a strategy for Indigenous housing throughout all organizations that deal with Aboriginal people, but including yours as a national organization.
Yeah, and I think that particularly when it comes to the north, there are huge opportunities, particularly on the modular housing side of things, and we've just created a new council focusing on modular housing panelized construction, which would be particularly applicable for moving into remote communities with short construction seasons and that sort of thing, and making sure that the technologies are appropriate. But as you also mentioned, there's a huge need for affordable solutions, and by that I mean not social housing at all, but things that are cheaper to build and construct and get up there. And I think that as part of the national housing strategy, as part of the federal approach, we really need to focus on this. We have housing affordability issues in every part of Canada. Nowhere is it more extreme than in the north. And we need to really focus on research and innovation, putting Canada back to be a leader in this area like it was. Frankly, through the 80s and 90s, Canada led the world in cold climate building science for residential construction. We've fallen behind. We've underinvested at a time when, now we have affordability crunches, and we know the challenges of the First Nations people. So it is an opportunity to take a federal leadership role, reinvest, and help find the solutions. And the industry has always had a great relationship with the federal government in all of these R&D programs, and we would look forward to continuing that.